Thank you. I'm just so honored to be here. I really appreciate you and all the other folks at Mentor Canada for bringing this presentation to this sort of venue and this audience. Hello everyone. It's really unfortunate that I can't see all of your faces, but I'm just talking to the number of participants that I can see. Thank you so much for choosing to tune in today. I know that there's probably about 10 webinars an hour that you have a chance to participate in, and so I really appreciate you choosing this one. My name is Shannon Varga. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm from the Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts. And so today, as Veronique mentioned, I'll be talking about a framework that my colleague Jonathan Zaff and I wrote called the Was Support Framework. And we wrote this after about a decade of combined relationships research. And so if you could just go to the next slide.
If you go to the top of your screen under view options, you are able to, where it says you are viewing Veronique Church-Dupuis's screen, you can click view options and then request
Oh,
remote control, and then you can take over from Vero.
okay.
Here we go. I hope this works.
Okay.
If it doesn't, happy to.
All right. So these are just a couple of the goals that are for this session today. I'm not sure that we're going to get to all of them or in this order, but just some things for you to expect. So we're going to do some grounding in relationships. I'm going to define the Was Support Framework, provide a lot of examples from use, like their actual quotes. There may be a chance to map your own web and then brainstorm action for your own programming. Okay, it worked for me. And so here are just some norms for this session. The video, oh, it went. Can we go back? Oh yeah. The video sort of really teed this up really well, but I just wanted to name, that it's currently a chaotic time with the compounding racial and health pandemics, across the world. It's certainly a chaotic time here in the US. And so I can understand that it can be difficult to concentrate for this amount of time. And also some of the stuff that's going to come up in the quotes may remind you of your own experiences or the experiences of young people that you work with. And some of those things may be traumatic or harmful. And so if you have to step away, like feel free to. This will be recorded and available. More norms include open engagement. And so while I can't see all of you, Veronique and Michael have the ability to see if you use the hand raise function. And so I really would appreciate if you want to engage at any time, just go ahead and engage. There are a couple of moments I have built in for you to engage, but if you have something that you want to share, like feel free to use the hand raise function and they'll go ahead and unmute you. And I just also want to name that there's expertise in this Zoom room. And so while I was invited to sort of guide this discussion, I want to, just name that you all are experts in the fields of relationships and mentoring, and you bring your own knowledge and experiences in programming that I'm really eager to learn from. And so just sort of the last few norms here are about being aware of your space. If you get the opportunity to share, just make sure you're not oversharing, or if you end up being in a group or something, make sure you give other people time to share. And also just the idea that the Was Support isn't, necessarily like a new, unique idea. So the idea of it takes a village to raise a child has been around for a really long time, but it's incredibly complex and difficult to capture. And so today is just sort of a deep dive in how to apply this frame in your own life and how relationships and support really operate in young people's lives. But there's a lot more work to be done with this frame, and I hope that all of you can be a part of it. So I hope this presentation sparks some new conversations or connections for everyone here. I'm just checking the chat. Okay. Okay. And so, I'm just clicking through too quickly. Just to start out and to ground ourselves in relationships, if you have not heard of Dr. Mim's work, please look her up. But her quote about the first intervention we should do is self-reflection wisely reminds me that while we all show up to do our jobs and to webinars like this to ensure we're providing the best relational supports that we can for youth, we often forget that we are all people who are affected by and in relationship with others. And we bring that with us everywhere we go, especially, to the youth that we work with. So I just wanted to start this session off with everyone taking a few minutes to sort of reflect and write down your answers to the following questions. Why did you come to this work? And what do you hope to get out of this session? And you can feel free to share that in the chat function, or you can just keep it for yourself. I'm just gonna give everyone a minute or two to reflect. And actually, just because we're a little bit short on time, I may just continue just because I want to get through everything. And so no one has shared yet, but I'm willing to bet that some of you, you know, I had really great mentors when I was growing up, but I noticed even more adults who sort of treated youth as the enemy. And I always wondered how they seem to have forgotten what it was like to be a young person. And so I went into research on supportive adults because I deeply benefited from adult support as a young person. And, you know, Veronique said that I had an impressive bio, but that is only because of all the opportunities that I took from many adults who wanted to help me. But I noticed around me that not everybody was receiving sort of the same treatment or given the same opportunities. And so I just wanted to know how we could make relationships better for all young people. And so I joined a research institute called the Center for Promise after grad school, which you may be familiar with. It is the research arm of a national nonprofit in the United States called America's Promise Alliance. And for when I had joined them, they had spent about 5 years trying to figure out how to get every young person in America one caring adult. And that's because, you know, when you talk to young people who disengage and then re-engage in school or career pathways, usually they name like one person who was really significant in support of them. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. That's why you're in mentoring organizations. We all know how important mentors can be. But what we found was it was actually that relationships matter, but relationships with more than one adult is really what matters. So it might be one person that brings a young person back to school or to a job, but usually it's relationships with all of the adults in that sector that really get the young person to stay or to continue on or to transition successfully, as you might say. So after listening to more than 120 young people and over 3,000 survey responses, the Center for Promise found that relationships matter for young people, but their importance to graduation varies by type support and intensity of support. The youth that our mentoring programs often aim to serve are often leaving environments that are toxic and oppressive. And I've heard countless stories of youth facing discriminatory school environments that are bolstered by the attitudes, policies, structures. And these attitudes reflect a higher level sentiment in society about youth, especially marginalized youth. So young people are often leaving situations that, again, are just toxic and harmful to them. And we also found that while supportive relationships can buffer the effects of adverse life experiences on leaving school, it can also open the opportunity for youth to express their strengths. But for youth that are facing the greatest risks to graduation, support from family, schools, and friends doesn't actually overcome the effect of numerous adverse life experiences. So more intensive, intentional, and specialized support may be needed for those young people. And those are the young people that mentoring really works for. And so when we get to this idea of a web of support, you know, for youth to be able to access the support that they need to stay in school and succeed in life, they need both a stable relationship like a mentor, which we call an anchor, and I'll get into this later and define it later. But again, they also need a larger network of supportive adults to keep them engaged. Okay. And so then these are just quotes that are just sort of going to be illustrating what I just spoke about. So this young person says that entering a program was a turning point, and it was a turning point because she met an adult that said that they were proud of her. And so this is her quote. It was a turning point because nobody has ever said to me that they were proud of me. And he's like, I admire you for all the stuff that you've been through. He said, someday I hope that I can grow up and be like have your strength and your determination and your motivation. And she says, that really touched me. Me and him are still friends. And then he introduced her to someone else who became like her little big brother and provided her with other kinds of support. And, you know, he always asks her, like, did you eat? Why didn't you tell me? And, you know, I would have gotten you food. And she says, it's okay. She'll be okay. And things like that. And so this quote just really demonstrates the essentiality of how important relationships can be. She describes sort of receiving appraisal support from the career pathway program and also some emotional support. But then I want to point out that she describes being connected to other people. So she talks about how one person was the person who really made her interested in being in the program, but then there were other people who she was connected to along the way that gave her additional supports that we needed. I would also like to point out that this young person is saying that entering this career pathways program, that was the first time she ever met an adult who told her that they were proud of her. And for so many young people that I end up interviewing for my research, that is the case. Okay, so this example really weaves together several of the findings. And so I'm just going to read the quote really quick, and then I'll explain the context. So the young person says, I've been in foster care since my 12th birthday, so I moved around a lot. I've never been consistent with school. Back to childhood, I've missed like months at a time and things like that. The biggest issue for me was when I went to high school was the teachers not understanding how to deal with kids like me. I was really behind. I had been moving around a lot. They weren't sure what to do with me or how to help me. They eventually ended up writing me off. I was moving around foster homes a lot. So it's like you didn't get any support from anywhere. After a while, I just stopped going to class, stopped doing homework, skipped school, and started, I got into drugs and things like that. And it took my sister seeing how good she had done in a program to get back to school, because the reality was that I found out if I stayed in my high school, I would have had no chance of graduating on time. And the teachers just told me tough shit. And so, this example demonstrates how relationships matter, how home and school personnel and foster care systems did not provide support for multiple transitions that young person had to go through. And that's ultimately what caused Denise to interrupt her education. And eventually a connection through a family member and an ex-boyfriend got her into a program with adults that were more equipped with the knowledge of the issues of the foster care system and how youth who have been through that system bring that trauma with them everywhere that they go. And so, and I just want to point out again, the biggest part of this example is an example of how many, many, many negative interactions that seem very micro build up to encourage a young person to leave a context. And these are things that you don't normally see or aren't, strongly measurable, just like the million tiny little cuts that young people go through every day. Okay, so here are just two examples from Marco and Antonio, who both faced difficulties at home. Marco himself went through a period of homelessness. And so Marco says the teachers didn't care, the principals didn't care. I told my counselors, I told a couple teachers, but I didn't want to because they didn't care. From the way that they come at me on a regular basis, they don't try to talk to me. And then Antonio echoes this and say, I was trying to stay engaged as much as I could, but it was like no one was helping me, nobody. I would go to school, the teachers wouldn't even acknowledge me. I would say, I'm behind, can you do this for me? And they were like, no, all I can do is give you this, and you try to do what you can do today. A lot of teachers didn't even know my name. And it got really bad, and it got to the point where I wasn't going to graduate. And so again, this is Marco and Antonio talking about how interactions with many adults in this school ultimately led them to believe that no one was going to help them, either from them outright saying that they didn't want to help them, or from, again, just like asking and not really getting the help that they really needed. And so I just wanted to, let you all think about how many young people are denied help repeatedly before they are labeled someone who cannot be helped. So these are young people who did ask and then were turned down and then eventually just decided that they wouldn't reach out. And so then this is one of our final examples just to illustrate sort of the findings from the previous reports, which are all publicly available. And this is just one that demonstrates a web of supportive relationships is most often necessary for sustained transitions. And so the quote says, I think a lot of our students come in not having that sense of community. The program is one of the first places where they can feel that. It's really weird for some students, like I'm supported everywhere, this isn't how things happen. That was a bit of a struggle for me, having to reach out. I don't know how. Well, the program leaders say, we'll teach you how to work out and we'll help you and we'll give you the feedback and we'll tell you how you can do it even better. And even if you don't like what you're doing, even if you don't feel like you're doing better, we'll give you some feedback or we'll help you develop goals to get you to your target of what you want to do. The culture of being able to approach anybody, changing my mindset about how we should be supporting each other and not fighting against each other or trying to steal resources or opportunities from other folks. I think that's what's really great about this program. And so Marquise is a young person who became a program staff after going through this program. And he describes how this career pathway programs offers young people sort of a core of intentional and integrated support. And I just want to point out, like what his quote is alluding to here, that many of this youth that are served by this career pathways program are lacking community, not a single adult. So they feel like they're lacking a community and when they join the program. And he sort of tangibly describes how adults in the program show up for youth goals and center their interactions around trying to help them reach their goals. He talks about a mindset shift from competing for resources, which is a very capitalistic, individualistic mindset, which is common in the United States, to cooperating, for resources and to get to your goals, which again is very not. Okay, so that was a lot already. I just want to take a step back. That was just me trying to summarize about 5 years of research that went into this theory. So we haven't even gotten to the theory yet. I just want to take a few more minutes for people to sort of, reflect back on their own lives and think about these two questions. So what were your relationships like with adults who did not rise to the level of mentors across your educational journeys? And then how have relationships with those adults affected how you show up as an adult in the lives of any young person you engage with? So we just listened to a bunch of quotes of adults who were not young people's mentors by and large, and how they made those young people feel. So how did adults that were not your mentors across your life make you feel? And again, we won't give the full 5 minutes for this, but just a few moments for folks to reflect. I'm just reading some of the responses in the chat. It seems like, and I saw one of the questions was about painting a negative light of teachers, and I apologize. It's just that a lot of the quotes that I pulled from to sort of just demonstrate just the breadth of negative or neutral interactions that young people can have with adults. Like a lot of the young people that we end up interviewing spend a lot of time in school. And so that's where most of the examples come from, but we have an equal amount of positive teacher quotes. Just for the participant, Caroline, who asked about positive teacher quotes. Yes, we do have positive teacher quotes, and teachers are usually a huge part of, helping young people stay in school. So it was not my intention to paint teachers in a negative light. Just these quotes happen to be about teachers. I have plenty about bosses and supervisors. But I do see a number of people who are saying, like, had similar experiences to me growing up, where there's just a lot of unsupportive adults, where we don't really experience true supportive adults. Some people are like, a lot of apathetic adults, not necessarily hostile, which again, just makes you feel a kind of way. Thank you, Veronique, for sharing about your grad school supervisor. Just a lot of supervisors sort of lacking social skills. Okay, and so yeah, similarly, I feel like I spend a lot of time in front of young people just trying to counteract sort of the negative examples that I had growing up of adults, and again, just trying to emulate sort of the positive examples I had. So thank you everyone for sharing. It's time to finally get into the framework. Yay. Okay, so this is the framework that we created as a response to all this research, which was telling us that multiple relationships matter, that attitudes matter, that the availability and access of resources matter, the structures, policies, and practice around all of those things matter for young people to successfully transition into their educational and career journeys. I also just want to acknowledge that Drs. Renee Spencer, Sarah Schwartz, Jean Rhodes, Tom Keller, Nancy Deutsch, and so many others in this space have writing that, you know, are related to this theory that, you know, move to a systems level thinking beyond sort of one-to-one relationships, which we would call a dyad. And I've collaborated with many of them. So I just want to point out that all of their work exists, and we're all working, you know, with the knowledge of each other, not in silos, in our areas of more specific expertise to try to get more systems way of thinking to everyone who's working with young people. Okay, so what is a web of support? A web of support refers to the network of relationships youth have with all adults and peers across contexts in their lives. And in these contexts, supports are provided that help young people advance in development towards their goals. So that's like a lot of stuff, and there were a lot of theories that went into it. And so as a tool, a web of support can be utilized to define and visualize current and potential supports in a young person's life, it changes in their networks, and also identify areas where greater support or more coordinated supports or interventions would be more effective. And then as a framework, which is probably what we're going to spend more time doing, you know, today, it's just a way of changing people's mindsets about relationships so that, you know, they can organize programs and policies and practices from a perspective that reflects really what's going on developmentally. And this acknowledges the importance of the alignment of relationships and resources available to young people with their social position, historical and other contextual information. All right. Okay, I'm actually going to go back one here so we could just briefly look at the structure of the web. So just to quickly walk through the structure of the web, young people are located at the center of the framework. All the other circles, I don't know if everyone can see my cursor here, represent different people that can be on their web. We call them actors. So actors could be an adult or a peer that provide some kind of support. Teal circles represent something in social network research that we call strong ties. And so these are usually ties that are built with people frequently, they're long-term. So family, you know, you usually have a lot of strong ties in family because you've known them for your whole life. You're very close with them, but you can have friends, you can have a cluster of close ties in any context, in your community, at school, after school, anywhere. And so then the orange circles represent weak ties. And so the strong ties are the ones that provide most of your supports that you need on a daily basis. But weak ties are people who may provide a one-off support every once in a while. They're people who you interact with a little less frequently than your core ties. And importantly, they could become a core tie at some point. So if one of your core ties, you know, ends up leaving your network for some reason, an orange tie may be able to sort of step in and replace that. And then sort of the red circles that aren't filled in and that have the dotted lines connected to them, those are considered potential ties. And so those are ties that the young people doesn't directly know, but that someone else in their network knows who could probably connect them to it. And we have the least amount of research on that. So I apologize if someone found that really interesting. There's the least amount of empirical support supporting that. It's just in theory, these people all have the ability to provide potential ties to young people. Okay. We went through this one already. And so then this is what a core of strong ties looks like. And theoretically, we think that young people have a core in sort of every context. So instead of sort of a traditional social network where you see a young person in the middle and everyone kind of just scattered around them, our framework sort of clusters them into context because the support that that core provides is probably highly related to whatever's happening in that context. So certain supports are more relevant for certain situations, like instrumental support is really, really useful for jobs and things like that, you know, like getting a ride, helping submit an application or something like that. And so this is just an example of what a core can look like. So you'll have your family core, which is your mother, your father, brother, and then this little A represents something called an anchor in the model. An anchor, if you're wondering where mentors sort of fit in this model, this is where they would fit. So an anchor is someone who provides sort of a comprehensive source of support to the young person. Every other person in the model might present one support, but the anchor is really the one that the young person feels like they can turn to for anything. And this is the person who you'll recognize as a mentor-like person. So if young people describe someone in their life that's like a mentor, they would probably be considered the anchor in that context. And we believe that young people need at least one anchor in their life to really be able to sort of transition positively. Ideally, they'd have an anchor in every single context. So family, school, work, but that's really hard to come by. So usually when you're talking to young people and they tell you about this one person who means everything to them, that's their anchor. And that person is located like in a context. And so here's an example of who might be in a young person's weak ties core for their family. So their grandmother and their aunt, who they may not see as much as their mother and their father, who they may live with. And then here are some potential ties that their extended family could connect them to. Okay. All right. And so what's really important about this theory are sort of the theories that it's built upon. And so we're going to spend a minute on this slide because it's a lot to hold, but it's all really important. And so we drew from several ecological theories to come up with the sort of assertion that youth are embedded in multi-layered ecologies filled with systems, institutions, policies, and practices, that youth have bidirectional interactions with this. And so embeddedness is important to hold on to because it's a reminder that youth are impacted by interactions with tons of adults who have not necessarily reflected on their own role or positionality in upholding oppressive attitudes, policies, or structures. And so often, many of their interactions with adults end up reinforcing deficit narratives, and young people may eventually display the effects of such interactions in their outcomes. Conversely, on the positive end, because I have not infused enough positive quotes in this presentation, I need you to know that embeddedness works the other way too. So the supportive relationships that you all can provide in your organizations with young people can actively work to combat these sort of oppressive attitudes and policies and structures that young people are facing in regular systems every day. And so your positive interactions with them can act as a buffer, and they can bring those with them everywhere they go. And so that's why it's important to remember how embedded relationships and resources are in young people's lives. Because again, they always bring it wherever they go. If they leave sort of the family core, everything that happened in that family core doesn't just disappear. So the next line is youth are active agents in their own development. And so our previous research and literature has shown us that youth are active agents in their own development. They don't just passively develop, they can make choices to engage or disengage with an adult or a resource that is placed in front of them. And so it follows that they're also active agents in building their own webs of support. And so this point is just to remind people that you should bring youth along as partners in this journey if you're going to think about sort of, people are like, oh, we want to build webs of support for young people. It's like, well, they already have webs and they're already building them. They may not think about it that way or use that language, but they are. And so you should remember that that exists and bring them along. Okay, and so then we also drew from social capital and social support research to include what young people can gain from their networks. And so we talk about different kinds of social support and different kinds of social capital that end up being exchanged in the web. And this point about youth can have different kinds of relationships in the web, depending on the support exchange, length of time known, frequency of contact. That's all the different levels of ties that we've shown here. And also the idea of an anchor or a mentor. That's where that fits in this web. So there are different, levels of support that young people can get from adults, and they can all be important for different reasons. So this theory does not just get rid of mentoring. It just situates it within a larger ecology of adult relationships that all impact a young person. Okay, and so the final point about webs are dynamic, and they change sort of the structure of them and who's in it and what's provided change with the young person's age and what developmental need they have. And also their social positioning is key. And so the reason why their social positioning is so important is because it has to do with the availability of the resources to begin with. And so just for an example, in the United States context, some researchers have found that in research across race mentoring relationships, some youth of color may feel cultural distrust towards white adults because of the history of discrimination and oppression of people in the United States. And so historically, and especially today, those effects are still felt. So that's why it's really important to consider a young person's social positioning, sort of their race, class, ethnicity, gender, the history, especially in countries that sort of stratify resources based on social positioning. And this is important because, for example, in the United States, in areas because of mass incarceration and over policing in low-income communities, which disproportionately affect people of color, This often leads to a shortage of adults who are even available as a resource for youth to begin with. So when you're looking into a context, all of these different things matter, because if you're going to look at a young person and be like, why don't you have all these adults? You have to remember there may not even be adults for a number of other sort of macro level factors that have really little to do with the actual young person in their day-to-day life. Does anybody have any questions or comments about these theories? All right, and so these are the resources that I just briefly mentioned before. And so here are some definitions for them so that we have some shared language for the rest of the session. Social capital, which is sort of this idea of it's not what you know, it's who you know, that a lot of people think about, is an important sort of resource that is exchanged in youth-adult relationships. And there are actually two kinds. Most people think of the first kind, which is bridging social capital, which just means connecting a young person to a new network or a new resource that they may not otherwise have had access to. And then there's also bonding social capital, which is sort of a psychological value gained from interactions with others with shared identities. So it's more of an internal resource that young people get, like enjoying their time with someone that shares an identity. Okay, and so then there's also 5 different kinds of social support that are just well supported by the literature, again, that function for different reasons. And so there's emotional support, which its purest definition is just offering a safe and non-judgmental space for sort of hearing out youth's, problems or grievances or things like that. I just say in its purest form because it's really hard to get an example of emotional support from a young person that's not also tied with an immediate follow-up of a solution, which is a more practical instrumental support. There's informational support, which is just advice or guidance, so just telling them about something. Instrumental, which is the one I keep referring to, is again a practical, like hands-on support, so like giving them a ride or lending them money for something. Validation is also known a lot as affirmation, but it is basically just allowing the young person, just giving them some kind of indication of how they're doing in reference to the rest of society or their peers, just letting them know that it's okay, it's like normal to like go through these struggles and things like that, and that they're doing a great job. And then there's also companionship support, which is one that I feel like is under-researched, but it's just like, again, just enjoying a person. And I think it's a huge spark for, crossing sort of traditional boundary lines with young people, like especially with teachers. The first thing young people tell me about teachers that they nominate as important adults in their lives, they're like, well, he was funny, or I just like enjoyed her, in ways that I don't enjoy other teachers. And so that was the one thing that sort of broke down their barriers to then being open to actually hearing the teacher out for like advice or guidance. But first they needed to just enjoy them. So those are just different kinds of support. Okay. We can just take a quick break for anyone who needs to get up real quick. I personally have to get up real quick. I'm so sorry. So I just want to take a minute to let everyone use the restroom or refresh their drink if they need to. But I'm just gonna.
Thank you, Shannon. Oof. Sorry, there was quite an echo here. I'm using 2 computers to try to manage everything. Enjoy the break, everyone. I think it's helpful to remember that we're human, and sitting still 4 hours is difficult, especially when we know that we don't ask that from the young people we work with. So we'll be there when in a couple minutes when you come back. In the meantime, I see that Leslie has posted a question in the chat, so we'll raise that when we come back. If you have other questions, please post them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're monitoring those for testimonies and questions as well. Shannon, I don't know if you noticed the comment or the question from Leslie in the chat about the deficit mentality. So I don't know if you want to address that now or later in the presentation, but I think that's a fair point and something that we could benefit from hearing a little bit more about.
Sure. Yeah. And so, you know, and again, this is all this data was collected in the United States. And so this is very reflective of the sort of larger context here. But in the United States, there's sort of this general belief about adolescence, like just the developmental period, that it's I don't know if you've heard the storm and stress type mentality, but it's still very strong in the United States. Like when I did my dissertation on this work, like there was an article released the week, so this was in 2016. The week that I did, was writing up the beginning of my dissertation, there was an article in NPR about how negative stereotypes about adolescents are negatively affecting their parents. And I was like, well, what about the adolescents? Can you only imagine if it's like so bad that it negatively affects the parents? Can you imagine the recipient of all of those negative attitudes? So, and then I think like Gallup, which is, a large polling company, polled several thousand adults across the United States a couple of years ago. And they found them like the top common 3 words to describe young people were things like lazy and like unmotivated and like rebellious and things like that. And so there's just this, I feel like I'm swimming in it when you talk to adults about young people here, like this just belief that, again, young people think they know everything, but don't know anything. Like they have so much to learn from adults, that they're never putting in as much effort as they have the ability to do so without any regard for what's going on in their life or, the structures and resources around them. And so a lot of the young people that I speak with, we speak with young people who are quote unquote at risk for interrupting their education or career. And that usually just means that they have several adverse life experiences. Like if you've heard of the adverse life experience scale, these young people are experiencing many of them at once. And so there's just so many reasons in their background indicators that are suggesting that they may sort of not finish. And when I speak with these young people, the first thing they share things that other adults are shocked that young people share with me, but it's because you've never spoken to them as a person. And that's why they're just shocked that anyone wants to listen to them. They're like, what do you mean you want to hear what I have to say? And I'm like, what you have to say is the most important thing I could hear today. And so they tell us everything. And again, it's so disappointing and heartbreaking, the number of young people who tell us this one adult was the first person, and they're 15 or 17 or 18. This is the first person who told me that they believed in me, or the first person who said anything positive to me about who I am and what my prospects in life are. Because in the United States, there's just all these horror stories of young people going through the school system and interacting with adults that are telling them you're going nowhere in life. If they ask for help for going to college, there's a number of adults in this country that will dissuade them, right? Tell them well, that's actually not for you, right? You're not capable of succeeding there. We don't want to set you up for failure. Go do this instead. So I'm not sure if that's helpful. Is there anything, what's the general feeling about young people in Canada? Oh, okay. So Leslie's saying that's not much different in Canada.
It's not that much different, I would say. Again, the deficit mentality is very present, and in our structures and our systems too, right? In our funding structures too, is how are you going to address the problems that young people have and things like that. So I think it's quite similar here, and the youth sector generally has been working very hard to bring that positive development youth development lens on its work and its practices and structures, but it is work in progress too, right? You're juggling that and then writing grant proposals and project application where you have to use more of a deficit model. So, and that discourse being so present, and I mean, the culture between the two countries is very porous. So this discourse about young people being deficient is very easy to internalize, I think, for our young people here as well.
Yeah, and Dr. Bianca J. Baldridge wrote a great article about sort of even if we think we're being PYD, we can sometimes reify deficit narratives. If we're talking about programming only, right, for youth of color. And so it basically, and even if it seems like it's a good idea, if it doesn't include a discussion about how systems and policies and structures are oppressing them and give them the tools to actually deconstruct those, then it's basically just saying that this group of kids needs to be skilled up and the rest don't. And it's like, that's not true. All youth need to be skilled up in different areas. And also, you know, what we choose to skill up is in a whole other discussion. Caroline, would you like to say more about your comment about schools and how they're using the information about the teenage brain to change the way they view and work with adolescents?
We can, if you're interested, Caroline, we can, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can share. If that's not something you're interested in, we respect that as well.
All right, well, we can keep going while that.
Michael, I see Caroline has raised her hand. Michael, I don't have control to do that. Can you unmute Caroline for us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Just more and more of the educational journals are providing all the latest kind of neuroscience information about the teenage brain and how that impacts how teenagers act and learn and what they do. So I know that in our middle schools and our high schools, that is a hot topic right now, and they're doing lots of work around that to better understand why teens behave the way they do, what kinds of supports they need, and how they best learn.
Well, that's great to hear that more schools are using that information.
Thank you so much for sharing. All right, I think we can move on to the second part of your session, Shannon, if that works for you.
Yep.
And again, if other folks are interested in sharing and want to raise their hand later on in the presentation, please do so. It's a small crowd today, so we're able to allow people to vocalize their thoughts if they prefer that.
Yeah. Okay, and so just really quickly to go through the first way that webs of support can be used as a tool. This is, again, the most straightforward way that you can use this is to actually map youth's webs of support. And so you can do this at multiple time points, asking about their current relationships, and then view both maps to see if it changes. Or you can ask them retrospectively, like before and after they've transitioned. If you already have a bunch of youth who have like successfully transitioned and you want to learn about, you know, what supports they had in their lives, you can ask them sort of like before the program and after the program narratively, and then build a web kind of like we've done here with Rosie. And so Rosie was interviewed for a project about leaving and returning to school. And so she talked about how at the age of 14, she was in the system. She, as you can see here, before leaving school on the left side, she describes very, very few supports. Even though she felt supported by her charter school, she, for reasons of her life, had to go through a bunch of transitions to different schools. She had to move around a lot. She felt some support, but she just had too many challenges. For example, her foster parents were using drugs. Her social worker was just telling her to just stick it out and just get through until they age out of the system, which again is a shockingly common theme that we hear from young people, is that they're just told to just stick it out, just like deal with all of the abuse and oppression and just get through it. And then, so at one of her lowest points during her disengagement, her grandmother, who used to work at this career pathways program, got her to enroll. She also knew someone else who enrolled there. And this is what she had to say about the program. She said, they call you by your name. They know who you are. It's like, oh, what are you wearing today? What's going on? You know, it's a connection versus when you're walking in, it's just like, oh, good morning. How's your morning? Good. Okay, that's good. Get to work. And you know, she also described how, as you can see on the returning to school side, this program had several people that they surround young people with that offer different supports that she needed. And so, and she said that she had never experienced anything like this before in her life. That's one of the main things they do. They literally chase you around. They'll go to your house, because they've gone to my house. They ask me, why are you not going to school? Is there something that's bothering you? Are you not comfortable? They are always there to make sure that you're in your best zone to come in. So that's one of the things they zone you in. And so her her web pre and post shows you just the changes in different supports and how she was then able to make more connections at her new school. But also, this sort of just demonstrates that young people do sort of like need an array of support. So again, she had 1 or 2 supportive people in school before, but it wasn't enough to sort of overcome all the other adversities in her lives. And so until she had a more connected web, and again, when her quotes that I just read sort of demonstrate how these people cross contexts, right? Just to make sure that when she said they make sure that you're zoned in to come in every day for everything, you know, they're crossing the contexts because they understand that all these things, like her mindset, matter in another context. So even though she feels really good in the program, she needs to also feel really good at school. So they made sure that she felt good to go into school and things like that. So that's just a really quick example of a pre-post retrospective web. Here are some examples of webs that we've mapped, like what does your current supports look like? And so we've asked young people to hand draw, which is this top picture. We've also tried to use apps like web-based apps or tablet-based apps. I was going to say phone-based, but none of them are really phone-based yet. And so that's what you see here in the bottom picture. And basically how we ask young people to map their webs is we tell them to put themselves in the center and then think about who they interact with most and sort of list those people out however they want. Again, we're going to try to get this into sort of an application so that it'll always look standard and will be more helpful to people to measure. But for now, the best thing that we can do is just, again, make sure that you have them list the people who they interact with most and then reflect on if like how often they interact with those people, how they interact with those people, if they trust those people, how long they've known them, what support those adults provided. So again, go back to those 4 points. We usually ask questions like, do you have someone that you can talk to, right? If you are feeling stressed out, then that's like emotional support. Do you have someone who can give you a ride? That's practical support. And things like that. And so then we also ask them to sort of indicate the relationship among all the people that they name. So do these people know each other? Because in theory, again, the more connected your web is, the more resilient you are to sort of trauma or adverse life experiences. Because if the people in your life know each other and they know when you're going through a hard time, they can talk to each other and sort of align their supports. So here are just some reflections from young people who have mapped their webs with us, in case you're wondering, you know, how young people react. So we've had young people map their webs, and some young people have responded, you know, when we're asked them like, how did this exercise go for you? What did you notice anything? This is what some of them said. So one said, I don't trust people to give me helpful advice, and therefore my support network isn't that large. It's most likely linked to the fact that I don't feel understood. My support system does not interact with each other, and I don't know why. So this is a young person who had a couple people, but then felt like, 1, I don't trust anyone. So that's why there's not as many as I was hoping. And then 2, none of them are talking to each other. And that's interesting because she doesn't really trust them. So she doesn't want them to know each other. But that was not something that she really thought about until she actually mapped her web out. Same thing with the next person who was surprised at how little she interacts with the people that are in her web. So that idea of frequency, right, of how often do you interact with the people in your web? This person was like, actually, I don't interact with people that often, which is really concerning because they're who I look for. Like when you asked me, who do I go to or who do I interact with? These are the people that came up. And actually, I don't even talk to them that much. And the next one said, professionals are the people I want to interact with more because I have friends and family that I connect with regularly, but I need more adults to open more opportunities for me. And so this idea, again, of explaining that there are different kinds of support that you can get, this young person realized she had tons of emotional support and like encouragement to go forward, but she didn't have the kinds of adults that would functionally or informationally be able to provide the kind of information and resources that she needed to move forward. And again, so another person said, something that surprised me is I struggle with trusting these adults. I could use some more support at home because I don't really get a lot. So again, this is a young person who mapped out her supports or their supports and then realized, oh, when I asked the trust question, again, I don't trust these people. I don't trust that these people in Dr. Aisha Griffith's definition have my best interest at heart. And then also, again, this is just more of the visual, where they have support. It's good to get a young person to think about, you know, like actually, even though it's my home, like you default to assume that you have support, but when you really start thinking about support in these really concrete definitions, do you get that from anyone? And this person was like, actually, no. Another one about more emotional support is helpful. And then this one was a positive one who said, I realized how many people were actually there for me and I want to interact with more, with my teachers and coaches more because I want more support. So again, there are negative times when we map young people's webs and they feel like they truly have no one. And then we have to, sort of walk them through just sort of the trauma of feeling like no adult has ever wanted anything positive for you. But then there's also the converse side where we can have some young people who feel highly unsupported once they start doing this, actually realize there are more adults that they have access to than they even thought about, and maybe you should start looking towards them more. All right. Oh, here's some more examples. Again, you all can go through these later, but there's just, we found that we had initially started to map webs just to collect data about young people in our studies, and then it turned into sort of an intervention for them because just the moment of having to sit there and think about themselves in relation, like immediately opened up all these new questions and thoughts about relationships that they never really intentionally had. And so that's just a great example of it. Okay. I promise we will get to the web mapping section, but this is just, if you don't have sort of the resources or time to map a ton of young people in your program, I just wanted to point out 2 examples from 2 different schools of what young people were saying about sort of relationships and their experiences in those schools to show you how you can just use it as a frame instead of actually like a mapping tool. So if you're just listening to what young people are saying and you keep all of the tenets of the webs of support in mind, you'll be able to sort of pull out from just their quotes, whether or not they have supports or not, whether or not there are things in the environment that are, problematic or not. And so here are some quotes from 2 schools that are located in sanctuary cities, which are for undocumented families in the United States, in a northeastern area of the United States. So there are 2 cities that are located not so far apart that serve similar populations of emergent bilingual students. And so our first school, School A, has somewhat of a pretty deficit experience for the young people. So here's some examples of what some of the young people say in that school. This one young person says, everything we talk and we say, everything we speak, if we say the truth, nobody believes us. They believe native English speakers more than they believe them. And that's why I haven't said anything. And while they punish you for nothing, because they punished me for 2.5 hours for having said that to them. And the person who was talking about was him, not us. And so this person is just talking about how in the United States, we have, I'm sure if any of you are aware, there's incredibly deficit attitudes towards immigrants, especially now. And so these young people are feeling sort of the impacts of those larger societal attitudes. We also have many anti-immigration policies that were, that were in legislation at this time. And so again, all of these different things trickle down into how youth experience them in the classroom. Another example is this young person talks about how the school itself had a system of every young person had to wear an ID. And if you were an immigrant or a youth who had English as your second language, you had a different colored ID. And so I imagine that this policy was put in place to sort of flag for different adults in the building if they saw a young person with this ID, or even like another young person in the building. If you saw someone with this colored ID and they were having trouble getting around, you would immediately know that it was probably due to the fact that they were not a native English speaker and they may need a little bit extra support because of that reason. But instead of it sort of being used positively, it ended up being used as a targeting tool. And so this young person says, when I came to the school, they gave an ID to me. And when we walk down the hall, everyone says, here comes the immigrants, the group of immigrants. And I haven't really wanted to get in trouble. And so I listened to them and I remain quiet because I don't want any problems. I came here to learn. And so this young person talks about how anyone in the school, whether or not they're an immigrant or not, if they have this ID, they get bullied, as a foreigner and othered, no matter what happens. Okay, and then the next quote says, it's like if I have a problem at home or with somebody, I can tell my parents. If I want to tell someone else, I'd rather tell my parents. I don't feel like going to my teacher. My parents know my life and they know how to advise me. So this is just a quote about an example of a young person saying that they don't feel like the teachers in the building know them. And then we could talk about some other things that get into, we had other indications that the teachers don't try to get to know them. And then this quote says, the program in which we were in, we've learned, but the rest of the students aside from the English learner program, they're not in it. They teach them and assign them homework. They set expectations for students in those class. They learn a lot, but we don't. We're learning almost the same thing every day. So these young people are describing how the curriculum they get not being challenging enough and feeling like it's the same thing every day makes them feel like the adults in the building don't have high expectations of them and don't believe that they're capable of like learning or excelling and things like that. And again, this is not something that you think that young people are taking from curriculum, but it is what they're taking. They get tired of just, you know, and so this is a specific kind of English learning program which removes young people from the mainstream classroom, and they're just getting these really basic worksheets every day. And again, just feeling like that's giving them a message about the adults in their environment and how they feel about them and what they think about them and what society at large, the United States society, thinks about them. And the consequence of that is this next quote, which is, I think we're still not ready at an English level to take sort of the state assessment exam, which is really important to the school's funding. And yeah, so they're saying we didn't feel prepared. We knew some English, but we didn't feel prepared. And that just kept them down and made them feel like not trying harder. And so again, this is related to the low expectations that they were feeling earlier. And then the bottom part is just to show you that these young people still feel like they need to persist despite experiencing this discrimination. So this person says, I do belong for the reason that people look down on me. And that's where I gain more strength to show that I'm not less than others. Instead, we're all equal. I've had so many problems at the school ever since I started. I've always had problems, so I didn't like it. And sometimes I wanted to leave the school. For example, bullying from the one-way dresses, the one-way speaks, the one-way walk, the way one walks. The truth is that seeing that the racism that they have on us, one gains like more courage to learn English and to show them that you can. And so again, so there's young people are navigating these environments every day, these relationships every day. And so getting through them regardless, but we owe it to them to sort of remove this if we can. Okay, so here's school B. This is a more positive example, by the way, because I just feel so worried that I've only presented negative examples of schools. So this, again, is a school that serves a lot of emergent bilingual students located very near the first one that you heard. And this is what they have to say about their experiences and their teachers and their policies. So this one says, my teachers, they're really good and they're always there for me. They always tell me, focus on what you want to accomplish and never give up. I know that you can do it. And that has helped me a lot to learn English and also other things to keep on going and achieve my goals. So again, this young person is just explaining how some emotional support, some encouragement, some validation to let them know that they can do it, really, really push them forward. Another one says, well, I think that all the teachers talk about how each of our lives were. I imagine our journey from our home countries from here, right? But in our first year, when I came here, we wrote a book, and he points at someone else who was in the focus group. We wrote a book about immigration, and each of us had to write a paragraph. Everyone in the class had to write a paragraph that went into the book. And then he says, and that up until now, I still have that book at home. And so I feel that way, like the teachers are also trying to get information out of us so that they can know more from us. So this is an example of like culturally relevant pedagogy. And again, a way that a young person felt the curriculum, instead of showing not care, was actually showing care. And so again, I understand it's like really difficult. A lot of schools don't structure time for relationship building, but again, there's ways that you can use actual structured time, again, to express care, to intentionally show that you want to know them. Like these students just want to be seen and want to be known. That's really a basis of a lot of what I hear from them. Okay, and so then another one in the same school goes, I go after school to see a teacher that I know. She stays after school every day, helping students from all English levels, like level 1 with their homework. Everyone stays, so I stay back as well. And all of us support each other because English level 1 students, those in English level 2 know less English than I do, so we're there helping each other out. So again, this is just an example of how just modeling behavior then just like seeps into sort of the rest of the culture. And so peers are super supportive to peers in this school, and they were super unsupportive, right, in the previous school, because they're sort of just taking the lead of sort of the adults in the building and the policies in the building. And so in the first school, they were othered, they were, labeled. And in this school, everyone is just together, and the teachers are just, making sure that they're spending extra time or any time they can with them, making sure that they all know that they're all working together. And so finally, one of the other students who received a lot of help from this teacher says, she helps me, I help her too. When new students come in from a Spanish-speaking country, she sometimes calls me down so I can give them a little tour around the school and just explain to them, like how the locker works and everything. So I help her with that, and I like it because it's like you get to help these other students. I want to help them because it was just like my first day here. It was crazy. So I understand how they must feel, right? I mean, they must feel the same way. And yeah, especially because, they're Spanish, we communicate better, we understand each other more. So this is just an example of a young person getting the opportunity to contribute back after she's been helped so greatly. Like she felt so grateful to the teacher. She wanted to give back to her community of peers. She didn't have to do any of this, but she chose to constantly sort of be a peer supporter whenever any new peer came to the school that shared identities that she had. Okay, so those are just some things that came out in the quotes for me. Does anybody else have anything that they wanted to share about the quotes that they noticed or that resonated with them? You can share in the chat or raise your hand. And I was going to say, would it surprise you to know that school A structures their English learning program as a pullout and that school B structures it as a mainstream program? And so again, this is just a subtle way in which just the structure of the programming tells young people about values, about how you think about them and how you see them. And so the one that just removed them and sort of kept them away from all the mainstream English learners, they just kind of felt like they were ostracized and othered. And then that sort of trickled out into their social interactions too. Whereas the one that, again, put them in mainstream, they were always there learning with their peers, they're always helping one another, developed more of a culture of like collaborativeness, like we all need to help each other in something. And then would it surprise you that neither school had more than one or two staff that youth identified as sharing their native language? So while there is no sort of substitute for having well-trained staff that actually have similar lived experiences, right, to the youth that you're working with, it's also not an excuse if you don't have them, that you can't make a connection to young people, because there are plenty of teachers across this country who connect with young people that they don't share their native language, and they're doing a great job. And so just to point out that there are ways that you can make connection even if you don't share sort of the native language. And again, it's just trying to show the young person that you want to get to know them. And again, structuring programming in such a way that lets them know that they are a part of the community instead of just, like a random pullout. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions about all of the things we just tried to hold when we were reading those quotes? Okay. All right, so this is an opportunity for everyone to map their webs if they want. I don't know if you want to, we only have 15 minutes left. So you can all maybe do this after if you want to map your own web, like here's the directions for it and you'll have it. I'd rather get to a point of being able to have discussions and questions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be a good way to keep moving.
Okay, all right, so we'll just kind of skip that. Oh, those are the resources that, if you were gonna map your web, like here's a reminder of what they are. Okay, and so here are just some questions that I'd love for folks to sort of think about and then maybe share some of your responses. But sort of what are some of the attitudes of adults and youth in your organization about young people? And then do your policies consider the embedded nature of relationships and also youth agency? Are your practices aligned with your attitudes and policies? So you may feel that you strongly believe positively things about young people. You may have asset-based attitudes, but do your policies reflect those things? And do your practices reflect those attitudes? And then how does your organization account for social positioning of themselves and also the young people who they intend to serve?
Can we maybe go back to the previous slide, Shannon? I think it was really thought-provoking, and if folks are interested in sharing about their practices and policies, we would be very interested in hearing about that. Things that we think might not matter, including policies, end up having a huge impact on the young people that we're trying to serve. Oh, here, all in the chat, very helpful. So I think that when we're starting to think about how to achieve change and support young people in a better, more effective way, it's helpful to use this framework and start moving from an individualistic perspective to look more at a systemic level. And I think those questions make us think on that level. So they're extremely helpful. I think that might be something that we want to revisit year after year when you're doing your year-end review for your organization or something. Now we have some comments. Right, so folks having a National Youth Advisory Council, which is very important, right? Nothing about youth without youth, including young people in your governance structures and as part, a key part of your organization's frameworks and day-to-day activities. That's a good start.
That is a great start. We actually, when I was working at America's Promise Alliance, we had youth board members, and we actually had youth board members challenge us on their title of youth board member instead of just board member. And so they were like, that actually, thinking about that designation still others us. And still makes them feel like positionality wise, it sets them below the rest of the board. And so that was something interesting for us to consider. They still have youth board members at America's Promise. Because again, it's still like better than not having youth board members. Youth. Yes, the mapping exercise has been incredibly helpful for young, again, because it's like, I mean, how often do we all think about our own relationships and the structure of our own relationships and whether or not they're actually set up in a way that's going to help us meet goals or not? You know, we're not trained to, and I think the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, let everybody know that we were all living, you know, with this privilege of human beings, you know, we have a tendency to naturally develop social relationships, but for at least, you know, 5 million or more young people in America, like that's not, the situation is not such that they're able to create these natural relationships so easily in school or at work, because again, of all these larger, you know, attitudes and policies and laws about young people. I mean, if we think about just the way that even like in the United States in high school, young people have to raise their hand to ask to go to the bathroom up until they're 18. And then 3 months later, they may be on a college campus where there are no rules. And it's like shocking to adults on college campuses how young people act on college campuses. But I'm like, think about what the scaffolding was before that moment. They literally just had to ask permission to relieve themselves 3 months ago. So like, why do you think that it's suddenly, you know, you're literally setting them up to be a certain way when they get to college? But people don't think about it to that level. But we have to think about how all these things are connected and what messages they send and, you know, what it reflects about what we believe about young people. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm using the mouse and then I end up moving the slides inadvertently. The challenges of sharing technology. What I think was most interesting for me when I heard your presentation the first time was this, which might even be a relief for mentors, this idea of moving away from thinking of the mentoring relationship as the end all and be all and moving away from that dyad to really embrace a systems level thinking and think about, yes, maybe your mentor is an anchor in one of your in clusters of relationships, but they can only be as successful as you can be with the support from the other folks in your web of support. So I think it's helpful for me to do this web of support exercise. I'm like, oh yeah, like we don't often pause to think about who's there to help us and in what ways. And if you're a mentor with a young person, maybe you want to do this exercise with them directly to help them think beyond your relationship and get them thinking about all of other relationships in their lives upon which they can draw. And sometimes it's a more limited ask. And other times it's a person with untapped potential that could become another mentor or another key resource.
Yeah, no, thank you for pointing that out. I think one of the biggest struggles we have, like, of course, like mentors are so important and we wish we could have more of them, but not everybody, I think some people get turned off by the idea of like the time commitment or worrying about letting a young person down. And so I don't want to tell them like, don't worry, you're probably already letting young people down. And if you're in a youth serving context, like not without realizing it. So maybe if it's helpful to know that like, but yeah, sort of this just idea of how embedded relationships are. We're working with Mentor in the United States on a relationships focused school project. And from what we've heard with some of our partners is when you go to a school and ask them what they know about relationships, they'll go, yeah, I have this mentoring program, which is great. You know, it like that's, you know, leagues above not having a mentoring program at all. But as, you know, you pointed out, Veronique, it's like, it's a lot to be a mentor and not everybody can be a mentor and we don't have enough of them. And so this sort of lets them off the hook. But also lets them know, you know, like your principal in your school may be a really great mentor to their mentee in the mentoring program, but that principal has the ability to make decisions about policies that affect every young person. They're also in the hallway of the school every day, and that micro interaction with the principal has the opportunity to like have either a great positive impact on every young person they pass, or can have a neutral or negative impact. Like, you know, someone at the beginning talked about apathetic adults. Apathetic adults are also harmful. And so if you're, you know, just in a hallway and with an adult that like doesn't even look at you or talk to you or treat you like a person, that's going to have an impact. And so this theory is to just try to let people know, like, you're in front of young people every day, or you have an impact on young people every day if you're in some kind of youth serving sector, whether or not it's just your direct mentee that you're like putting all your all and all of your energy into. It's like, no, we have to start learning how to normalize interactions on a daily basis. Again, every interaction with a young person is an opportunity to either leave them with a positive, you know, impression, or leave them with nothing or harm them. And so just trying to remember all of this. Again, it may sound like a lot, but is, as Veronique pointed out, like much less than being an actual mentor. Because, you know, we saw some young people's quotes, you know, oh, they know my name. And it's like, again, astonishingly painful how many young people think just being called by their name by an adult is the greatest thing, or at least like a hugely different experience than all the other adults that they interact with. And it's just like, what are we doing to young people in this country?
And it ties in very nicely with next week's talk with Sophia Duck from the Southwestern Pennsylvania Mentoring Partnership about developing a more of a mentoring mindset in all adults that volunteer and work with youth, right? So just acknowledging and recognizing that each interaction we have with young people has a potential to have a positive, neutral, or negative impact. And how do we develop people's skills to act as positive influences and supports and caring adults, even if there might not always be mentors. I share the example of one of my grad studies supervisor, and like, we put these people in positions where they should be mentors to the young people they're supervising, where we're not providing them with any training or any skills, and we just assume that they know how to do it, where academics are sometimes deficient in social skills, and it can have adverse impact on young people coming in their programs. So, you know, we need to think about upskilling youth, but also upskilling adults so that they are able to be there for young people. We have another comment from Mr. Sunshine called empowering youth from the beginning of the program. We have a national child and safety program called Strong from Start that every child and mentor gets at the beginning of the relation, talks about healthy relationship, voices and choices, and circles of support, and empowers them right from the beginning, right? That's great. Thinking about the circles of support, I think is a great way.
Yeah, that is really awesome to hear, Mr. Sunshine. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for attending, and thank you all for bearing with me. Again, this is normally would create to be a session where I could see all your faces and we can all interact, but I hope that it was helpful. And again, just to sort of close out, these are like the main points that if you take away anything from this presentation, just remember that it's people that fill institutions and uphold those policies, structures, practices, and attitudes that young people are definitely impacted by. Youth agency, their characteristics, and their social positioning are essential to understanding sort of the availability of adults and resources for them, as well as how to engage them. Relationships between all adults and all peers in a web matter. All adults have the potential to provide at least one kind of support and superheroes aren't sustainable or scalable. So I usually tell people that adults are our most scalable resource that we have, just caring adults. And so to try to be the one person who's doing everything is not scalable. But if we can get all adults to realize they can do one thing, at least one thing, even if it's just saying hello and, you know, looking at the young person and calling them by their name, then we'll actually be in a much better place than we were if, you know, we have a couple of great people who are doing everything. So yeah. And then just sort of the closing reminder is about how, you know, once again, and some of the quotes reflected this, that youth are still out there overcoming the oppressive systems every day, you know, while we're just sitting here and, you know, like pontificating about them, like they're experiencing them. So we owe it to them to do whatever we can to get these barriers and policies and attitudes out of their way. And also, I'm just pontificating about them. All of you who are attending are actually doing something about it. So thank you. I really appreciate it. All right, so thank you all so much. And here are just some other, here's some references that inform this presentation, but also things that could be used for continued learning.
So we'll post the slides online so you can have access to those references. Please join me in thanking Dr. Varga for this great presentation. I think it's the framework, the Webs of Support framework is helpful, and it provides a theoretical framework to some of the work that many programs are already attempting or even doing in terms of giving young people the tools and the supports they need to fulfill their potential. And I think that holds great promise for the mentoring field generally. And here, let me just see if I can get my mouse. Here we go. If you have any other questions, please ask them in the Q&A. We can follow up offline afterwards if needed. And I just want to remind you about our next 2 webinars on the 26th and the 9th, which will tie in very nicely with today's presentation. It's a very nice theoretical framework to support us in our next chats. And I mean, it's a theoretical framework with great practical application, which is why I really love it. So thank you everyone for attending today. And thank you again to Dr. Varga for sharing her insights and research findings with us. And we look forward to seeing you soon.